All right, thank you very much. Feel free to stop me at any time. I'm going to probably even go off script because some of the really fascinating things about this process are kind of embedded in the diagram. And it's, a very technical crowd here as well. So just feel free to ask things, and some of them I can defer and find answers to and get back to you later on. But just wanted to share, our experience and give you some indication of the pitfalls we had and some of the successes that we had in our project. So to start off, we had this challenge of integrating an international and domestic business units in television distribution. And if you saw me earlier, I described what those folks do. They sell TV shows. And they sell original stuff that Sony produces and creates. It's ideas of guys walking around with scripts at Sony, turn into TV shows, and then they turn into 22 episodes for a season, and then that gets all groomed. Fees are determined. You decide how much this is worth, who wants it, all that kind of stuff. Very sophisticated sales process. So I'm involved in those sales applications, and then on through to the finance applications, both for distribution and the networks business. They're slightly varied businesses. So we'll cover some of the nature and background on that. I'll give you a little background on how TV shows are sold. Then we'll look at that current landscape, and that's where I want to talk around how ugly things were. And I'm sure it's not 170 ERP systems, but even with a few systems, things can get messy and they get old and neglected. And we'll show you what we were up against there. Then I'll show you the future landscape, which is where MarkLogic fit in the middle as our sales to handoff moderating system and validation and revenue transfer system. And then we can talk around, what's better about that and where we want to head with that. And I'll talk a little bit about the conversion process, how it was a conversion hub, then it became kind of our runtime. We reserved the right to keep it as just a conversion hub, but then decided to bring it into production. And then just some conclusions about where we think we're headed. So Sony Pictures Television, as I said, is part of Sony Pictures Entertainment, which is part of Sony Corporation. So that's the hierarchy. We're a many billion-dollar business. Sony Pictures Entertainment is about a $9 billion business, and we sell to networks, channels, TV stations you can tune in, to video-on-demand systems, content, and it's distributed to over 175. We can really distribute to 190 countries. Because some of our partners like Netflix are in 190 countries. So yeah, let's sell it. You can show it. We'll sell it to you. And then the groups that are at Sony Pictures Television are you can see at the bottom there, the U.S. distribution and international distribution. So those are the guys that do the licensing, the sale, and all through the revenue life cycle of the money that gets made from television programming. There's a U.S. ad sales team because ad sales are the lifeblood of ordinary television. You're going to watch pharmaceutical commercials or whatever, and these guys are selling all those spots. We have a U.S. production business there in the middle. Those are the guys who are actually, conceiving, funding the production of a Breaking Bad or The Good Doctor, the television shows that we go out and sell, or we broadcast our own Sony-owned stations. And that in its own right is a big business and a big part of the success of Sony. And then we have international productions that do the same outside of the United States. And then worldwide networks, which Sony can't own channels in the United States because it's a foreign-owned company. So FCC regulations prevent us from owning channels in the US. But we own 101 channels, something like that, globally in India, the UK, Brazil, Asia Pac, Singapore, Malaysia, all that. So it's a big enterprise outside the U.S. and the brand is quite large globally. So I'm going to get all of these up here. So I just want to explain a little bit how they're sold and managed. So I was talking about how I use the term manufacturing, and some people come into media and entertainment and they naively think like an ERP system can manage everything you're doing. And my argument is that ERP systems are good when you have some fixed product that you sell to zero. So if you're a chair manufacturer, you're going to go to China or Vietnam and you're going to manufacture 100,000 chairs, you're going to ship them over and you're going to release them in Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, and you're going to sell to zero. I don't want to trivialize that. That's a very complex activity. You got felt pads and wicker and all that kind of stuff. It's very, very, very complex in its own right. But in media and entertainment, the sales process, you ask yourself, how much can I get for this show relative to the myriad of options there are within this landscape to sell? Do I commit everything to Netflix? Do I commit everything to Amazon? Do I commit stuff to my local channels to preserve their content playout, things like that? So it's very, very complex how you sell it. And like I said, that piece of the pie becomes kind of nebulous. Like, what is a piece of the pie? And once I've removed that piece and taken it off the board, what do I have left? And how do I dice this up again to sell even more? So it's a very difficult forecasting challenge for the salespeople. And Sony has done a good job in managing that up to this point with the systems that we had. But we need to move into a new space, need to move into something more modern and something that's more adept at managing the data. So just as far as activities, there's exploitation rights, which are rights to play out a show, Breaking Bad, The Blacklist. You're a channel who has a demographic that wants to see Breaking Bad or The Good Doctor. And so, okay, it fits your demographic, you want to buy it, and we're going to give you exploitation rights or playout rights. There are options on that. There are non-exclusive holdbacks. There are time-based minimum guarantees. There are lots of complexities that are expressed. And there are deal points, which are ordinary attributes of contracts, who the customer is, the duration of the contract, things like that. Material requests. So once a sale is made, you've got to get that digital asset out to that territory that wants to play it out. So we have hooks into the material fulfillment systems that then arrange for delivery in time for play out of that asset. Those are all triggered from the contract system. Availability is a big part of it. Availability is, if you think of like flight airline availability, they're selling seat 12B on the plane, and that seat's gone from LA to San Francisco. Okay, we sold it. The availability of TV shows as an intellectual property and as that permutation and those combinations of ways that can be sold make for an incredibly complex availability algorithm to determine. And the way we currently solve that is through the cross-product Cartesian SQL, billion rows in the database, look it up with some really big stored procedure, do a bunch of conditional checks on it to whittle it down, and then all of a sudden you got an answer as to whether The Good Doctor is available in season 2 in the UK for FY 2019 or so on. And these contracts run for multiple years as well, so these things are extremely difficult computationally to well, I wouldn't say it's difficult for a relational database to do it well. Okay, so some people are going to say no big deal, and I hope one day we get to like sub-second availability. The reality is availability in our world takes hours of time. When Netflix wants to reserve a TV show, we kick off a stored procedure. And that stored procedure slogs away and builds a bunch of temp tables and builds a bunch of intermediate results and does its thing. And hours later, you get your answer. Maybe you made a mistake. You got to run it again, right? So it's a really complex process, and Avails is at the core of really inventory management of this intellectual property. Then there are documents, the original contracts and whatnot. We have a document management system at Sony that we use and throw those documents and build links into the application to access. I'm looking at library services potentially as a way to store those, make those discoverable, and contextualize them within the modules or with whatever the workflow the user is doing. So that kind of explains some of the elements that are involved. Then it goes on, fees are established for the show. The fees can vary. If you meet the minimum guarantee, your fees can change. If you sell them quickly, you get a better deal. If time expires, they become more expensive because we want you to give up the rights. They're just a myriad of combinations of fees that can trigger based upon time. And so those feed into a finance system that has to make sense of it all and turn it into invoices and billing and collections and all. So that gives you a glimpse of some of the factors involved. So I wouldn't say it was the messiest landscape I've ever seen. It's just kind of common. Maybe. I mean, I'd be interested in talking with you guys. You know, there's an old mainframe. Okay, well, it's 30 years old and you can't change it. Okay, it's kind of typical these days. I guess over time, maybe in 10 years, it'll be less common. Or we'll just figure ways to build SOAs around the mainframes or whatnot. So, you know that can be done as well. But this mainframe had literally run out of gas. As an example, the guy retiring was one thing. I mean, that was kind of a funny little thing about we're actually losing the only guy who knows how every dollar goes from the sales to finance system of the domestic application. So that's a terrible thing. Let's not let that happen. But little things like dashes in phone numbers could not be stripped on edit. I'm going, you've got to be kidding me. These guys cannot take dashes out of phone numbers because of some reason I could never understand. But it had literally run out of gas. It was unmaintainable. It wasn't keeping step with the business that was growing very quickly. And so finally, it had become time to get this mainframe retired and out of the critical path loop. And I tell people, bless us for our procrastination, because we waited long enough to, make some choices that were probably pretty reasonable. 5 years ago, we might have just thrown everything into, another Oracle schema, something like that, and done things in a very rudimentary, or commonplace way at that point in time. So the time was right to really look at a new way of doing this. It was kind of an M&A situation. So if you look at the United States in the top band here, and then international down below, it was kind of an acquisition by international of the domestic team. So the domestic team was the one stuck with the least modern systems and stuck with the mainframe. Great people, super planners, fantastic. And in fact, because they had done so well in planning, they had almost learned to live without, sophisticated systems. It was very, very, very advanced group. But at any rate, their systems were oldest, and so they were going down and going to be brought into the new stuff. So we primarily kept the international systems. We beefed them up. We took the mainframe data and any other domestic sales data. There was a Java applet on the top band that handled sales that wasn't doing a very good job, and there were a ton of manual processes. As you can imagine, the mainframe can't be maintained. You can't meet your demand for change with the mainframe. So what do people do? They're going to make the sales anyway. They're going to log stuff in spreadsheets. They're going to store it out on shared drives. They're going to do pivot tables every way they can. They're going to have post-it notes on their monitors, to prompt them about what to do. They're going to derive these weird workflows that you would never do if you'd had a chance to sit at the table and work with them on designing a new system. So it was just time to get into a new world, and the international systems were a good ways along on that route. So the international sales to finance application there in the middle, on the bottom band in the middle, that was a Java applet application, and users were spending 42 minutes after they clicked the submit button to get all of the revenue and fee records validated so they could go over to the finance system. So, I'm saying, how do you know something's still working after 42 minutes, right? Guys in the London office are waiting for it. How do you even know that this thing is still working? Well, so, I called the DBA and he said it's still running, so it's going to finish, And this had become a commonplace thing within our group, is that people just accepted the fact that this thing was going to take this long, and all the data's coming down to the client side and whatnot. And so we had to get that guy out of there as well. And that guy was hanging on by a thread to do this validation of sales to finance. And that's where we came in with MarkLogic. So what we did is we started using MarkLogic as what we call a conversion hub. And Tim, you were part of some of that discussions and planning. And the idea was, listen, we need a place where we can throw this data and we can do some introspection on it. And we can decide what stays and what goes. And we can bring it in front of the users and we can say, what do you think about this record? So we kind of needed this moderated process which is why I kind of called it a conversion hub, where we had the option of spinning up some screens around this data and giving them like a next, previous, yes, no type of thing with this converted data. And we also needed a flexible way to just throw this in whatever data we found, because some of it would be spreadsheets, some of it was core from the mainframe and all that. And so we needed ways to be flexible with this, and MarkLogic was our choice for this conversion hub to be that vehicle. And as we got all of the data in from the legacy systems, there's rights data, there's fee data, there's templates for billing, there's work in progress on sales orders for multi-year contracts that have to go in there. A lot of different logical data objects were fitting into this conversion hub. We began to have confidence that we could stand up our production application around a portion of that data, so that the sales to finance task, we wouldn't have to go convert that data, get it ready for transport over to Oracle. We could keep it in place in MarkLogic and then do some more design around it and do some more efficient things, get document sizes right and all that kind of stuff. And then we would literally use that as our tool in production to validate sales orders, to do adjustment on sales orders. So for instance, if a minimum guarantee is not met, you're going to have to do some revisions in terms of the contractual obligations financially of the customer. And so those things can take place within that engine. Those events can be detected. You can show the users, and we have a really nice screen, in fact, where I called it the best screen in Hollywood, because it was these pivot tables. Our users were really, because they were so used to Excel-based stuff, we gave them as much as we could Excel on a web grid, and we used AG grid, commercial grid, and we threw it on top of the MarkLogic data, and made some REST calls in for the different functionality. And the users are just nuts about it. I mean, they can dice up this deal in 100 ways. They can look at 25 different dimensions. They can choose what columns they can sort, and then the fetch is reasonably quick. One thing we couldn't get them away from is seeing a ton of data on the browser, and so they are tolerating 20 seconds sometimes, but they're getting 80,000 rows of the browser. So the next step is we got to talk these guys into ways to look at more facet-oriented type of discovery of the data, and keep it at the server and then port it down to the browser a little more economically, right? But this thing could be blazing fast with the platform that we have. We'll have to get them not used to treating this stuff as just kind of raw data. But so we built that screen and the number of screens around the validation, and it's going live as we speak. So I can't say this has been running. It's in hypercare mode. It's in a conversion process, it's in a cutover process. But overall, it's been an exciting effort. I don't want to say we were innovators, because our bosses didn't want us to be innovators. They wanted us to be efficient and wanted us to do something that had a high guarantee of success. But what we felt would give us that higher degree of success was the ability to get this data somewhere where it was easy to view and manipulate and understand. And if there were changes in the data structures along the way, because things were kind of a moving target functionally, that we had a fighting chance of reacting and restructuring that data in a MarkLogic database, as opposed to being locked into a relational world where we'd have to modify the schema, do a lot of DDL around maintaining that data, standing it up again, and whatnot. I think we proved that we could be more agile with respect to our data design, and that has helped us a great deal. Still an extremely ambitious project. But this is an example of the screens that we're providing out of this S2F container. That grid was just wonderful, perfectly suitable to make REST data calls in and fetch the data that you need and show it and dice it up. So the users really appreciate the sophistication that we're providing them in terms of analyzing. It's head and shoulders above what they've had in the past. So they are actually committing to increasing revenue because we've made their jobs easier. And that was one of the foundations of the project. So what we learned is there's life after SQL. We were an organization that was hardcore PL SQL. and solving just any problem that would come up in very large stored procedures. And that was one of the things we wanted to do, was create kind of a firewall between our sales and finance applications and get this data into a place where we can make that next evolution, and we can say, okay, what are the next use cases? All right, well, we've got the data here already. We also do want to avoid some Oracle license fees in the future. We're moving that from AIX over to Intel. That's going to require, and we're talking about our cloud strategy and whatnot. So we feel like we're getting ourselves into a good space, having this transactional system now being based in MarkLogic. So the developers, the hardcore SQL developers didn't make the crossover yet, and there's tons of Oracle work. But the guys who are Java-based and used to working with JavaScript and XML and XQuery and stuff like that, and we didn't have too many XQuery folks around, but they really picked up very quickly. It was really a pleasure to see people become conversant. And we had some MarkLogic folks in and professional services folks in helping us to get off the ground. And it was a good relationship and a good partnership to get developers up to speed. So we also made a big push towards microservices. And so this fits in well, standing up kind of virtual listeners within MarkLogic, that being kind of software configurable, and then setting up queries that stand behind that, making calls into the middle tier, and then extending our functionality into service-based, in a service-based mode has been a big breath of fresh air in our architecture. It was a monolithic architecture. Obviously the mainframe didn't last, but the stuff that was in Java before, they were kind of thin wrappers around. How much time is that? Okay, all right. The stuff that was in Java even was almost a thin wrapper around some SQL stuff. And our lead architect who came in is really, strongly service-oriented, and it's been a really, really positive thing, and this tool fits in very well with us. So we proved that the data design was fluid in our landscape. We did have a midstream design change where we had to actually change the granularity of this fee data that was being sent over to the finance system. And everybody says, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And the guys made the change in about a week. It was okay. It worked fine, and everybody felt comfortable. We took that conversion-only technology, turned it into a production technology. So we did learn that MarkLogic won't do everything for you. You can make mistakes. That 80,000 rows down to the browser, it's just kind of wrong in our world to allow that kind of thing to happen. But it's a corporate app and a few hundred users. But you have to stress good data movement principles and good architectural principles in order to build a performance system and have yourself in a nice space functionally. And then you also have to watch the hardware requirements, because we under-provisioned at the start, and we wound up having to get some new servers and stand those up. And we were advised early to get your RAM up on your servers. And it took us a while to do that, but once we did, we were getting back into a place where the performance was pretty good. And in this day and age, there's no reason not to, it's ordinary hardware, just really ramp it up. But we are in kind of a cloud migration midstream, and people are trying to hesitate building out in our data center and whatnot. So future steps, we have a customer master, which might have been kind of our first natural step, but it was really invasive, changing all the SQL queries to call into a central customer master and stuff. So with no perceived business benefit, like they don't care where the customer record's stored. The business really doesn't care. So we didn't see extremely high value in moving our customer metadata over to MarkLogic. But from an architectural and purity standpoint, getting it within customer, getting our customer master within MarkLogic is probably a good next step. We also feel that we've kind of developed a pattern, like a mini pattern at Sony, where we can reuse this conversion hub, and then we'll add the operational data hub patterns that are way more advanced than what we designed into this. And so with other systems that are going to be migrated, for instance, there's a home entertainment system that's going to be coming into the TV landscape, getting that stuff put into our conversion hub, and kind of advancing that in terms of its moderation abilities and things like that is going to be a really nice thing. The other thing we're looking at is that avails challenge that I was talking about, that availability that's billions of rows right now, working with MarkLogic technology to express that in a much more condensed way, and then get to a point where we can potentially have sub-second avails, or just really quick availability checks. That's going to revolutionize the way people sell, because on Google I type my postal address 2191 space Corte, and it knows my postal address through auto suggestion, right? So if you have technology that's fast, you can open up new use cases for finding things that we think will be really valuable with respect to our very proprietary structure on our inventory. So yeah, it's just kind of fun with MarkLogic. Yes, sir.
How long did it take?
Let's see. It took about a year and a half of heads down work on the project to get to where we are at our cutover stage right now, and so honestly, it took us longer to greenlight our project than it's taken us. It took us longer than a year and a half to justify this, surprisingly, than it's taken to actually do the work. But once we had things in the conversion hub, we were showing data probably within 3 months, to the users. And that was really critical, because you may not have the end screens and the end product to the users, but it's the data is what they care about, right? So, they know about their customers, HBO, Sky B, that type of thing. And if you can show it to them in extract form and say, well, this came from the old system, it's going to go in the new system, having it show quickly is a really, really beneficial thing. So 3 months to show data, and then it's been a year and a half. Yeah.
I know we have a lot of great speakers in this session heading into lunch, so I think let's kind of cut the questions. We'll move to the next speaker we have coming in. So thanks, Rob, for a great presentation.